I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, and this is Prescription for Your Transformation, Real People, Real Conversations, and Real Success. And last time I was talking to this incredible person, Kari Brown, about what we need to know about our bodies. You know, what is the real compelling reason that we have to find out what's really happening inside of us? And guess what? We're at a time that we can actually do it ourselves. We don't have to depend on those doctors who, unfortunately, in my opinion, are so overworked and overwhelmed and sort of handcuffed to all sorts of regulations that they really don't have the capacity to help us as patients to really understand or get dialed in into our own health and well-being. You know, and I started on this journey about 20 years ago. We didn't even have the science then to really understand what was happening. And so fortunately, and in fact, in this particular case, it takes a non-medical person, but a citizen scientist to go on that journey and begin educating us as to what it is that we need to know and where we can go and find it. And so, Kari, we had a great conversation last time, and you talked about we have to reevaluate aging. I really understand that, you know, we have so much more energy and vitality within us. But the challenge that I think a lot of people have, and what I'd like you to share with us today, is where can people now begin to go to find out the information, and that they're not limited by their doctors or their doctors' lack of understanding or sometimes unwillingness to help us get that information.
Oh, that's such a big pool, actually. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because there's two interesting kind of worlds I feel as though I live in. I walk out on the street, you know, day to day, and pretty much can guarantee most people I'm going to walk into, if I talk to them, will have no visibility that, you know, that these things are possible, that these physicians who they could connect with, that these labs are available. But once you dive in and you connect with this community, it's actually vast, and the place that I have so much that I'm trying to get through and so many connections and resources. I'd rather be on the overwhelmed side. So hopefully I say that to let people know this isn't some tiny, you know, micro community. It's a very big community, and it just doesn't get the, if you want to say, mainstream. It's starting to get more, for sure, but it doesn't fit a mainstream narrative, because it's here's an excellent example, and I value this woman who said it so deeply. As you know, my mother has recently gone through some pretty significant health challenges, and I've made choices to bring her home and to help her recover, because I don't feel that the system in a rehab facility is going to do that, and that work is happening. But before we made that decision, talking to one of the physicians who was at the hospital about her condition, because cognitively she was incredibly impacted. And, you know, she said, look, we don't really know what happened. This is another form of dementia. We don't really have any answers, anything that we can do about it. And I let her speak, and I said, I appreciate your input. And here's all the work I've been doing with her the last 8 months, reversing her metabolic disease. And I got into the world of more root cause functional medicine, but I also listed off the actual blood markers, what we have done. This isn't woo-woo. This is like, we have improved her lab values, and we have reversed her metabolic disease. We've taken her off of several medications. And she smiled more and more and more as I said this. And I stopped, and she said, I can't thank you enough for saying that. This is a physician,
right?
A hospitalist. And she said, I couldn't agree with you more, but the New England Journal of Medicine does not allow me to say anything that you just said. Therein lies our rub, because there are beautiful people inside classically trained standard of care who are starting to understand that whether it was, you know, well-intended or agenda-driven, where we're handling medicine is not what supports the human body. So we had a great conversation after that, but I was incredibly amazed that she was bold enough to be able to be that open with me about it.
So like I said, sometimes it takes a citizen scientist who's a non-medical person who can get that, loud hailer out there and start, giving out that message as to what's possible. So
Yeah.
tell us what is possible. So lay people out there, where can they begin to go? And I know you've shared, many different websites with me. And what if you're to talk to a person on the street and they said, hey, you know what, you look so great, which you do. How do you do that? And then you say, well, I check out these biomarkers. What would you tell them?
The first thing I tell them, because I get asked that a lot, like, so what do you do? I want to do what you're doing. And I say, okay, I'm going to tell you two answers to that. Because the first answer is, I will tell you, but it is bespoke to me, right? I know my body incredibly well, and I know some of the things that I'm trying to resolve. So the protocol and what I'm doing is a bit of biohacking, but it's also very tuned to who I am on a fundamental level. So don't just do what I'm doing, because one, it could be completely ineffective, right? You just don't need to do it. So that's for me, instead of just taking on all these, ideologies or, go vegan, go vegetarian, do this, do that. I'm really passionate about helping people understand we gotta know how the body works first. Like, let's understand how it works. And I use the extreme examples, but they're extreme for a reason. Look, if you eat cookies all day long, and your blood work and your biomarkers and everything we know say you're rocking, keep eating the cookies all day long. I don't think that's going to happen for anyone, but that's what I'm talking about. And there's so many times that we miss that connection, right? Or unfortunately, it's far more on the other side of people buying into somebody said, this is the next thing, or do this and will fix everything. And it usually happens a lot in the plant-based world, and I'm not anti-plant-based, but there's a lot of claims that are being made where people are not being given information to make good decisions about their health, if that's actually something they should do, because plants are beautiful and tricky, very tricky. So there are, as far as labs, I need to preface this a little bit because I don't know how broad your audience is as far as just US or international or where they are.
Well,
so
let's stick for US for now, just for
okay.
simplicity.
Well, that's part of the interesting equation, is that the accessibility to some of this stuff right now is there's a bit of a disconnect. In the US, with the exception of New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, I believe, they're the only states. Those states, for some reason, do not allow what's called direct-to-consumer testing.
Right.
There are several really great labs out there where you can go online and order your own blood labs that are much more comprehensive. They're the same ones. Your doctor could order all these. They're not some magic thing that doesn't exist. Majority of them are almost all through LabCorp or Quest Diagnostics. So those are the two big labs. And you can start getting visibility on yourself. Now, I also always preface, lab results can be a benefit. And if you don't know how to interpret them, or you're given to the wrong person who will take them maybe in a direction that is not in alignment with root cause medicine, they can be tricky. So I advise people, one, there's a great website that's a good baseline called The Blood Code. And it's a beautiful way to start understanding just all, like a basic test, even on a CBC, comprehensive panel there, or comprehensive metabolic panel, CMP. And it walks through each one of those markers. What is it? What does it tell you? So start learning that. So when you get these things back, what look like, alien symbols on your blood lab are, that I think you might agree, they're actually not that hard to understand. They're not complex things. I think most people can get through them. So that's one website I like a lot. The list of places to get labs are done from, I could do, maybe if you do a show notes or something, I can list some of those, because it's a bit more to get into than
Sure.
at the moment. But what the biggest challenge is, a lot of business contacts, people I'm communicating with, will always send me their labs. That's one of the things that happens. Look at my labs. And especially when I see anything pulled from something that their insurance paid for, first and foremost, or their primary, it's an 80,000 foot view. And it's well-intended and it's not useless, but it is an 80,000 foot view, and it's missing core things. And people say, well, why doesn't my doctor pull that? I'm like, there are two main reasons for that. One, insurance. If you're wanting your insurance to cover this, Your doctor's got to have, as you know, the ability to write some type of diagnosis on there that justifies the test result, because we don't live in a world that does preventative testing. We live in a world that does like look for what's wrong, right? And then figure out from there. So these slightly more comprehensive tests or specific values, insurance doesn't want to pay for on a baseline. So there are beautiful functional medicine docs out there. And, you know, the one I've had my mom working with who did very comprehensive work was able to get everything through. So it's possible. If your doc doesn't want to pull it, which is a different conversation, they actually should if you request it. I'm always surprised when they push back on their patients and say, I feel it's necessary. It's like, well, may not, but I'm still asking for it. So I think there needs to be a new conversation and partnership between our primary care physicians and the patients. But there are labs where you can go get these things done. And really what we want to look at is core markers for metabolic syndrome, right? I think a lot of people say that they will get a fasting glucose, but the thing that absolutely has to be done parallel with that is fasting insulin. When we talk about 87% of the Western population has one or two of the 5 factors that make up metabolic disease. And in the neighborhood of 30 to 35% of the Western population has full-blown metabolic disease. If we just addressed blood glucose management and understanding that that is the one first domino that falls that makes the rest of them go, we would have some of the biggest impact in reversing chronic disease, bar none, with that one thing. So I'll quickly explain the glucose insulin. And again, I know you know a lot about this. We check fasting glucose. And you really want that to be below 90. And unfortunately, lab values are very big, as you know. And right now, the standard is, because the US population is so high, anything below 125 is acceptable. That is not an acceptable fasting glucose. That means you're already pre-diabetic. Means you're already insulin resistant. So we want below 90, but the challenge is the fasting insulin, the insulin is the water on the fire. You got all this fire, all this extra sugar running through your bloodstream, but how much water is having to be dumped on that to keep it there? So if you check your fasting insulin and it's skyrocketed high, but your fasting glucose is okay, it means that you have just, it's got a fire, it is just beaten up to try and keep down. So those are core things to look at. When people start understanding how to put those two numbers together, very simple two numbers and what they mean, even just understanding those two values will tell them so much if they are going to head themselves toward metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and Alzheimer's, cancer, all of it. It's the first domino. So I think if, again, there's maybe 10 markers that I could list off, but if people just started with those two,
you know,
it would fundamentally change their path forward.
You know, and I want to qualify something because I think this is very relevant, and I'm glad you said this, is that yes, you know, as much as these biomarkers are available, you know, you need an expert who really truly understands them to also advise you to do the right things, because it's very easy to do the wrong things. And there's different kind of, you know, factors that influence each other, and you could get into some serious trouble. The key is that what I find, and this is why I brought this up today, is simply this, is that most doctors are just overwhelmed. They can't keep up to date with everything. And so it's incumbent of every patient to be educated enough to understand what's available, so that you can then go to your educated, then you can go to your doctor and ask them, you know, what they can do for you. And this is what's important. So educating yourself as to what kind of biomarkers are important, like the glucose and the insulin. You also have the cardiometabolic panels, you have the inflammatory panels, you have the microbiome. Microbiome is a huge one with the leaky gut. And quite frankly, you know, a lot of the problems that you just mentioned have a relationship with inflammation. And so anything that contributes with that is going to be a critical factor in reversing the root cause, the root problem to all disease. And so I appreciate what you said in qualifying that, you do have to go to an expert to understand. You're different because you know so much already. So besides any other particular markers that you think are important as we wrap it up, we have a few more minutes.
The one there's two. One's a bucket of markers, but if I go to inflammation markers, there's two main ones, but I feel one is a bit more important to pay attention to. So there's CRP, C-reactive protein, but there's two tests for it. There's just a standard CRP and what's called high sensitivity HS-CRP. You want the HS-CRP test just because the standard CRP is just not specific enough to pick anything useful up. The challenge with the CRP is it's a generalized inflammation marker. But what it does tell you, if it continues to stay elevated, you do have inflammation in your body somewhere going on. And then you can do more specific tests to find out, is it liver inflammation? Like, where is that C-reactive protein coming up? So it is a bit more broad, but it's definitely something you want to keep below 1. And the other major one is called homocysteine, which is an amino acid. And the reason it's so important is it is 100% directly connected to cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure, which is all in the same bucket. And it is something that is missed. I am, to this day, I'm very puzzled why it is not part of a standard blood test, and that HSCRP is not either. Because if you got inflammation, if you got fires burning in your body, you are doing cellular level damage, right? And the homocysteine is driven by a lot of things. It's driven by genetics. And as an example, I have someone that I've worked with recently, and this is again the misnomer, incredibly beautifully healthy on the outside, who's been working through things and finally is really geeking out with me, she calls herself my apprentice. And so she finally did a big blood panel and has a couple things to look at, but came back with a pretty noticeably raised homocysteine, something you can't feel, but absolutely something that needs to be addressed and can be balanced completely. Now, unfortunately, and you may probably agree with this, Bart, I think standard primary docs don't understand how to do that. They won't know what to do with that, or know that it is an understanding of your methylfolate and your methyl B12 and how to properly balance that methylation cycle in your body. And you have to understand the gene component of it and several things to bring it in, but it is completely something that can be balanced, and is something that quite often is behind high blood pressure. That instead of giving people blood pressure medicines, I know several people who dove into their genetics and figured out they had mutations in all 3 of the genes that govern this. And once they understood that, found the right person, balanced those 2 things, voila, blood pressure issue gone.
And this you mentioned a key point, and the key point is this, and we discussed this earlier, is simply this, that our cells, we have 70,000 cells throughout the body, or I mean 70 trillion cells, not 70,000, 70 trillion cells. We have 70,000 thoughts per day, so that's where I got confused. One of my thoughts got warped there. So 70 trillion cells. And they all have one purpose. Their purpose is to survive, and they survive by having certain functions, so that the whole collective of functions allows us as a human being to survive. And so every cell is responding to the environment around them. So if you give it a toxic environment, it's going to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And so that's essentially what you're saying. You're saying, look, if I have these markers, they're responding to a toxic environment, let me change that toxic environment, or let me give the right kind of trophic factors, or let me remove those toxins, or whatever that is, so that we can get a proper balance. And this essentially is the root cause of all disease, is just simply an imbalance. It's really basic science, but unfortunately it has not become mainstream. And I can say this as a physician, and I've been a physician for a long time, but it has been my focus all these years. And finally now, with all the knowledge that's out there, we have the resources and the tools to be able to make that. But unfortunately, traditional medicine hasn't caught up. And so it's people like you that are really sharing, being very vocal with that message and helping us understand what it is that we need to do. So I want to thank you for these incredible insights, Kari. And I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many more conversations they can go off of this.
We
but
will.
I know. I want to touch base quickly on something is passionate to me to kind of wrap this up. And this is, I want people to know that I'm talking about all this, not because I walked into my own journey perfectly. I didn't, I had my own thing. But one of the things that really spurred my passion was understanding really what's underneath dementia and Alzheimer's, because it is an epidemic proportion now. And the simple factor is that our bodies are breaking down, and we break down our bodies, our brain breaks down. It's not some alien force that's coming in. It's not some virus. It's not some one-off thing. It is a collection of things that are stacked together that are breaking the body down. When it's on fire, the brain's on fire. And I carry one copy of the genetic variant called ApoE4, which has been highly correlated to Alzheimer's. And I feel it has been unfortunately deemed the Alzheimer's gene as if it's causative and not. So that's been a big passion of mine. And I want anyone who may be listening to this that knows someone, that is one biomarker, 100% that we definitely need to know. And not because people should be terrified that, oh my gosh, I have this and I'm going to get Alzheimer's. Every bit of information we learn is your superpower on how to avoid landing somewhere. But if you have ApoE4, it gives you a cool key to a map that says, oh, wow, this is my genetic heritage. My body operates best inside of this environment. And gosh, this environment we're living in today, nuclear bad combination. So it's not a causative. I really believe we need to carry that conversation forward. And it's a really good example, one of how as the statement goes, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Our genes are not our destiny.
Right.
And unraveling this unfortunate created fear around Alzheimer's and dementia that spotlight needs to be as big as our universe, because we shouldn't be failing in our brains the way we have, and we shouldn't be fearful that we have nothing to do about it, for sure.
And the key point here as well, which we've talked about, it's so easily accessible. It's accessible and available, and it's inexpensive to take care of. And so it's incumbent within all of us to just face reality, and reality is our best friend, because that's where we can find our own freedom. If we know the rules of the game, then we know how we can beat the game or win the game. If we don't know the rules, if we're not going to measure and monitor, then we can't manage, as you said earlier on in the show. And so this is the key point, and it's only up to you. And there needs to be no fear whatsoever associated with it, because there's enough smart people on this planet that can help us navigate that. And one of those is Kari Brown. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, prescription for your transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success, bringing to you most insightful and enlightening conversations from beautiful human beings like Kari. I thank you so much. I'll be back soon.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Rademacher's Prescription for Your Transformation. Continue the path towards discovering your own authentic genius by tuning in next time for more real conversations with real people.